So, Dawn, I'm so excited to have you here. You know how I feel about you if everyone else doesn't know. I love Dawn so much. We met
Thank
in
you.
Momentum in 2015. Dawn was
Mhm.
my team leader. I think it was 2015. And I just adore her. And we've been close ever since and just really respect the work that she does with helping healthcare professionals and organizations with workplace wellness and all the things that you do. And Dawn, I just thank you so much for coming here to chat with us tonight.
Thank you. I always grateful for any invitation from you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, everyone, I want to tell you more about Dawn. Dawn Shedrick is a licensed clinical social worker, trainer, consultant, and certified life and business coach with a broad range of experience, including clinical medical health practice. Dawn also designed and delivered workplace wellness seminars in corporate workplaces, including Travelers Insurance Global, JP Morgan Chase, GE, New York Mets Administration, Office Depot, National Grid, and Canning USA North American headquarters. She has facilitated trainings throughout the US and abroad in Canada, Puerto Rico, Tanzania, and China. Dawn is also an award winning lecturer at the Columbia University School of Social Work and St. Joseph's College Department of Human Services. She's a doctoral student studying adult learning and leadership at Teachers College, Columbia University, where her research and scholarship focuses on social work faculty development. So again, thank you, Dawn.
Thank
I got
you.
a drink to that bio. I love it.
Thank you. Right?
Excellent. So, everyone, our topic today, if you don't know, is talking especially to you healthcare professionals about managing stress and anxiety and burnout during this time. So, Dawn, I want to start off by asking you, tell us about your company, JenTex Consulting, and why you wanted to create a company that really supports healthcare professionals and social workers.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for the invitation. I've worked in human services my whole career, almost 25 years, and have been technically, been a credentialed licensed social worker for 20 years this year, and have done pretty much everything a social worker can do throughout my career. And absolutely love, we're not a perfect profession, but I absolutely love what I do. And I love all the possibilities that come through our work. And so I had been in private practice full time for about 5 years with a business partner. And as we came to the last year of our lease at the time, we started visioning for the future. And at that time, I had heard that social workers in New York were about to be mandated to complete continuing education. And I just felt that as much as I loved clinical practice, I knew that I didn't want to continue to do it full time. I really wanted to be able to offer not just continuing education workshops, but experiences for social workers because there wasn't really a lot out there for us to not just learn how to expand our practice, but to receive the validation and support and build community because what we do, what other mental health practitioners and healthcare professionals do, like it's hard work, and we don't always get the recognition. We don't always get the commensurate pay, but it's so rewarding. But I just wanted to offer a platform for multiple avenues of support for folks in health and human services.
And why do you think it's so difficult at times for the people who are charged with and who sign up to take care of other folks to take care of themselves?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question, right? It's so loaded, and so there's many different reasons, right? Many people come to this work because we want to help, we want to support others. We are trained and conditioned to dedicate our lives and our careers to the betterment of others, whatever that's going to look like, right? I know me personally, and many people that I know that are social workers, healthcare professionals, physicians, other mental health practitioners, like it's also just a part of our DNA, right? I'm a Pisces. I'm the firstborn child, right? I'm a
I'm a
caretaker.
Pisces baby.
Yes. And so it's like definitely all in my makeup, right? But we're also collectively conditioned in different ways to always be of service to others, to pour out, you know, um, that you give to others and you don't put yourself first. And for so many of us, it's written in the codes of our practice. to be of service, to support others, to dismantle oppressive systems. It's always outward focused. And so I think that like just reinforces this collective, identity of, my needs come second, to everyone else's.
Hmm. And what are the dangers of that? I mean, you and I have talked about this separately, and one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation, we have unfortunately started seeing, and everyone, weigh in on this, started seeing reports of how healthcare professionals are being traumatized, really. We all knew that, or figured that was going to happen, but really suffering trauma from having to take care of folks who are dealing with COVID-19. Watching some doctors have started talking about just the pain of watching people die and feel like you can't do anything, or like your work isn't quote unquote good enough to save them, which of course, isn't the case, but still, just as a human being, they're stressed out. And a lot of them are working obviously over the hours that they're supposed to work, probably. And sadly, most recently, the woman who was, I believe she was the director of medicine at one of the hospitals in New York, recently
Yeah,
committed
at the
suicide.
ER.
Yes, the head of the ER. Yes, and her family just talked about her stress because of that. And it's already a stress. You all are
Right.
already doing stressful. You're already taking on other people's pain or whatever their circumstances are, trying to help solve the problem, and then being in a highly stressful environment, and then just life. You have lives and things too. So I would love for you to just speak to the dangers of, if not before, if not before, why we should now, as healthcare workers, the healthcare professionals, make sure we recognize when we are potentially burning out and what burnout means in your definition.
Absolutely. Well, so one of the first things that I definitely want to speak to that you said, which is so critical because we're not hearing enough of this, is that we, health and human services professionals, were already burnt out,
Hmm.
right? So this is like a compounded experience of burnout and stress. And especially in healthcare. We'll talk later about the article I wrote, because that, in doing the research for that article into specifically into surgeons and physicians, I was like blown away by already existing data and research that supported the levels and the experience of burnout. And so many of us already came into this experiencing the stress, experiencing the burnout and the compassion fatigue. And so what happens with this pandemic, there's so many dynamics of this pandemic that really just compounds that experience. There's a lot about this we still don't know. Just a few months ago, the people who were at highest risk were our elders, people with compromised immune systems, respiratory illness, and so many of the rest of us, initially thought, okay, I'm good.
Hmm.
Now it's like every day, if not several times now throughout the day, we're hearing about different folks and different communities and populations that are impacted, different symptoms, different, people who are affected and impacted that weren't a part of that initial group. So it's just even that alone, like the collective stress of the unknown, is impactful. And so when you couple that with folks whose work, whether they are physically on the front lines, in the hospitals, in the ERs, in the health clinics, to people who are doing that same work from home, right? So there are social workers that are doing work from home, but there's additional stress that comes with that. You have folks who, I have plenty of friends who are school social workers who are working from home, right? They don't have the direct access to a lot of the kids that they've worked with when they're like on site at the school. They can't always get in touch with these kids who are already high risk, right? Who already may have been neglected at home. And so doing that from home and still trying to like, make those connections is like added stress, right?
And not to mention, if you have to homeschool your own kids and everybody else's, there's the other life part of it too that we don't think about,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. I have in the past month and a half, almost 2 months, heard from dozens of healthcare professionals who, again, they're still working in the ER. And so they are not only directly exposed to and have a high risk of contracting COVID-19, they are worried that they're going to bring it home to their families, right?
Hmm.
My brother is an ER nurse, and I'm constantly praying for him. I'm probably getting on his nerves because I'm texting him more than I usually do. You okay? come on, mommy just texted me, you know, like it's checking in
Right.
on him. My sister commutes on public transit to go into New York City every day because she's considered essential, right? So it's like we have these personal stresses and experiences, and then there's also the professional. And so I've spoken with social workers who are in the meetings where, especially weeks ago, they were in interdisciplinary team meetings where physicians were making decisions on who was going to be placed on the ventilator, like prioritizing many people who were having a chronic experience or an acute experience of this illness, or were seriously ill from other, illnesses and diseases that may have required them to be placed on a ventilator. Making those decisions, unfortunately, making death notification calls to spouses who were not present with their spouses or their family members because they couldn't visit, making those calls and fielding those calls and dealing with that raw pain and grief in the moment that they're notifying a spouse that they've lost a loved one, or a parent, or a child, or a sibling. And so it's this, I just keep saying, like, it's this compounded experience of stress and trauma. You're right, it's trauma. And so that also is contributing to the burnout, which, you ask, what is burnout? What a lot of people don't understand is, like, burnout is a thing. Like, it's not just this, I'm tired from working hard today, I'm burnt out, right? Well,
Right. Which is how people use it casually. Right.
right, very casually. It doesn't mean that we don't get fatigued from one day of hard work. But burnout, I actually call it occupational burnout, because for me, terming it that way, which it is in a lot of the literature, like, gives it the validity that it's an actual syndrome and an experience. And it's occupational, which distinguishes it from stress or personal stress, because with occupational burnout, there's an occupational, um, our work is a contributing factor to our experience of the burnout. And the burnout, which has been heavily researched for over 40 years, um, it's it's on a physical level, so we experience physical symptoms as a result of it, mental, emotional, even spiritually, meaning the spirit that's housed within us. And so it's been killing us. So my concern now is, with this pandemic now that we're collectively across the globe experiencing, I'm like, I think I mentioned to you before we started, like, I'm really interested to see, when people, continue to study the impact of the pandemic on stress and burnout. I'm really interested to see, like, how that's going to play out.
And do you think here in the US, I mean, people will see this and hear this everywhere, but at least here in the US, are there enough systems or support systems, I should say, in place to specifically help healthcare workers and people who are, I mean, obviously no one may have been prepared to deal with this type of trauma, but still, as we talked about, this was something that was occurring before, as far as these kind of decisions and different things that people have to make. But because it is so compounded now, do you feel like there are things currently in place? Well, thank God for your company, right?
Well,
JenTex
yeah, I
Consulting,
mean,
but otherwise, what else is there?
yeah, and thank you for that acknowledgement. I mean, I offer trainings. I mean, I
Mhm.
do a small amount of clinical work, but most of my work is education and training. But there are a lot of tools and resources that we do have access to, and that, hopefully collectively we will continue to access, right? So
Uh,
let me back up and explain stress,
okay.
so that I think then when we talk about what tools are available, hopefully it will really click and make sense,
And
right?
are those tools in your 7 things that we go through, or that'll be
Yes,
something?
absolutely.
Okay.
Oh
Okay. So we'll
yeah,
go through that, everyone. Everyone, make sure you go ahead and put questions in if you have questions as we go.
absolutely.
Okay. But go ahead.
So
Stress.
yeah, I wanted to share this because I know when I first started to just do my own self-directed research about stress, because I was stressed, right? It was so illuminating for me when I realized, like, what stress, how it impacts, like, us, like, in the body, and for me it was just so powerful, because I was like, wow, I can't always control the external factors, like the stressors, but at least gave me some information about how I can accept responsibility for my healing. And so when we're stressed out, there's a neurobiological response. So when we perceive something as stressful, right? So you're given another deadline at work when you already have a pile of projects that are due tomorrow, or you are concerned about your finances in the wake of this pandemic because you have lost income and you've lost work. You were diagnosed with a potentially terminal illness, or someone you love was, right? Anything that stresses us out. There are some things that inherently are stressful, such as COVID-19, such as receiving a diagnosis of a terminal illness, and there are other things that can be left up to our interpretation, right? So there are people out there who are really good at multitasking. Good for them, because I'm not one of them. The thought of having to multitask stresses me out, so that's a stressor. For other people, it gives them fuel to, to operate in a way that works for them, right? We perceive something as stressful, which technically, psychologically means we perceive something as harmful in some way. We have the same stress response in 2020 that our earliest human ancestors did thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of years ago. So we haven't even adapted to how we respond to stress. But when we, the moment that we perceive something as stressful, COVID-19, et cetera, we begin to release hormones that are cortisol being one of them, that's designed to protect our body from harm. We experience an elevated heart rate. Our blood sugar spikes, whether you're diabetic or not, right? Our heart rate, starts to race. Some people actually may feel heart palpitations. So there literally are physical responses. So let that marinate. Anytime we are stressed out, we have that physiological, neurobiological response. And so throughout the course of a day, we can experience that several times. I believe there's some research that says on a normal day, we can have that response at least 10 times. So again, that usually happens in like a 90-second window. That's how we're responding to stress. And so when people ask me, or when people wonder, well, why is stress so deadly? Think about it. On average, let's say without the stress of COVID-19, we are experiencing that response 10 times a day. So even if you are relatively healthy, that is at least 10 times a day, your blood sugar is spiking. So that could increase your risk of especially type 2 diabetes. If you have a family history of that, it's almost guaranteeing that you're going to join in the family tradition, right? That's at least 10 times a day, your heart rate is advancing. At least 10 times a day, cortisol, among others, is being released into your system. When the cortisol doesn't get to do its job, but it's been released, they say it settles in our midsection. When we collect the cortisol and our midsection expands, that increases our risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, right? And so if we think about how we are stressing now because of all of the different factors that are related to COVID-19, it's not just about, well, we have to just learn how to breathe and relax. It really is about how are we, and we'll talk about that with the 7 tips, but how am I going to ensure that my lifestyle as a practice is rooted in self-care, not just the buzzword self-care, but literally like taking time, whether it's proactive or reactive, to manage stress, because it already has been killing us. And so living in a pandemic, living in these uncharted waters, all of the stresses and all of the impact, some of which we haven't even met yet, is literally like impacting us physiologically, throughout the day, which is why, and that's what contributes to burnout. With burnout, we experience the physiological impact, which we can get sick, we can have muscle aches, everything, fatigue, So we have physiological symptoms. Then, of course, there's the emotional, reactions and symptoms. And there's also the mental, loss of concentration, inability to focus, right? Some short-term memory loss, like you walked into the kitchen to get an apple, you get to the fridge, you forget what you came for,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's so complex. And again, we can't always control those factors that are going to stress us out or burn us out. But I guess where the power lies is in how are we going to heal that? How are we going to manage that to the extent that we can, right? Because there's some factors that we can't. We wouldn't have COVID-19 anymore if it was up to us, right? Like, we wouldn't have had it in the first place if we really had control. So there are things that we can't control, but we can turn it inward to make sure that we can do the best we can to take good care of ourselves.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, it really resonated with me, just what you talked about, the things that we don't realize are symptoms of stress, things that aren't symptoms just of some kind of disease or, other kind of ailments that usually can be traced back to some kind of stressor, right? That
Right.
caused us to be, yes, in that circumstance. So I think that's the perfect place. And again, anyone, if you have any questions for Dawn or me, please put them in the Q&A chat box. I think that's the perfect time, Dawn, to go into your article that you wrote. And I do want to read, I wrote down here the introduction, which I think is a great setup for us having that part of the conversation. So Dawn wrote an article for, was it General
General
Surgery
surgery
News,
news.
generalsurgerynews.com. And it's about 7 ways to manage stress, burnout, exactly what we're talking about here. And in the article, in the lead, you said, quote, "We are navigating uncharted waters in the COVID-19 pandemic. Healthcare professionals face increased risk for compounded stress and burnout in the wake of this global crisis. Although information about the novel coronavirus develops at a rapid pace daily, the need to monitor and manage stress remains paramount. The health and well-being of all healthcare professionals is integral to ensuring healthcare systems can keep up with the needs of COVID-19 patients." So I just thought it was a good, such a power. Well, I love the whole thing. That's why I was like, can you come on and talk about this? This is what we need to hear. But I just think that intro of saying, just how much it matters to the healthcare professionals and how much it matters to all of us, which is why I think this conversation is great for all of us. So let's start with talking about that. Your first tip, you talked about know that what you're feeling is a normal stress response, which you sort of just explained to us. And I think one thing before you start about the
Mm-hmm.
historical things that have been learning recently about stress, just sort of like you said, we haven't adapted. Our bodies are still responding as if the saber-toothed tiger is there, right?
Right,
But
it's
but
running after you.
is running after us. But now we don't. The tiger never goes away. So that kind of feeling of heightened, anxiety and those kind of things, it doesn't go away. Whereas, before you either killed the tiger or it killed you, and end of story, right? So
Hmm.
I think knowing the historical context, and I think that leads into just what you said. Why do we need to know that it's a normal stress response?
Yeah, so what I've come to realize, and this is, I, I completely take ownership of this. It's not based on any research per se, but I've been a psychotherapist long enough to know that I believe that we globally, or many of us, right? Because there are some people who still think this is a hoax, but we're not going to go there. But many of us are in a state of acute stress. So acute stress actually is a normal initial response to stress and traumatic events. So I'll put it to you like this. When when someone experiences a trauma, right, involved in an auto accident, maybe they were assaulted, they were, the victim of a violent act, right? Our initial response to those types of events is technically called acute stress disorder. And I do air quotes because it is a diagnosable disorder. However, in the diagnostic criteria, it actually says it's a normal stress response. So why you would diagnose somebody with a normal stress response is a whole other conversation. However, when someone experiences that level of stress or trauma, acute stress is our initial reaction, usually within the first 4 weeks. So, in terms of post traumatic stress disorder, now I'm not diagnosing the world with PTSD, But so if someone comes to see me as a therapist, as a trauma specialist, something happened to me, I believe that I may have PTSD. The first questions that I ask have to give me some sort of indication of when this event or events happen. Because if it's something that happened, say, the week before I'm talking to them about it, then they are in what we call a state of acute stress. So that's the feelings of overwhelm, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of depression, sadness, helplessness, hopelessness, fatigue, right? This fogginess, like a brain fogginess, inability to concentrate. That's at what is considered a normal stress response. And so that just hit me one day, and just my own, like, I've been journaling. This Rona has had me journaling like crazy, right? But just journaling and just thinking, just reflecting to try to figure out, like, why even myself, like, what is this response that I'm having? And that's when it hit me, like, this is a global trauma and everything that comes with it, right?
Right.
So we are, I believe, like, again, collectively in this state of acute stress. And so when I started that article with that first tip, it was like, I just felt it necessary to let people know, like, what you're feeling is not abnormal. There's nothing wrong with you per se. It doesn't mean that you might not need additional care and TLC and maybe some external support, but those feelings are actually psychologically a normal response to stress, right? So our bodies are not wired for us to want to do backflips after we've experienced the trauma, right? If I'm victimized and if I'm assaulted, I'm not gonna, like, want to have to party and celebrate, right?
Right. And you can't just like snap out of it.
My initial response is going to be similar to what many of us are experiencing in this pandemic. And so that, I felt like, before we talk about any get help, talk it out, take a walk, like, I just felt like, just for some people, it's really just okay, like, understand that, like, it's okay and there's nothing wrong with you.
It's okay. I know I've seen posts about, I might have even reposted things that said it's okay to not feel
Be
okay right
okay.
now, right? It's okay to not
Mhm.
be okay. And I think that it's important for everyone. Thank you so much for sharing that and your reasoning for putting it first. It's important for everyone, but I think based on our conversation or for the sake of this conversation, especially for healthcare professionals to know that too, because they might be thinking, I'm not a healthcare professional, so I don't know. I don't want to project this, but I would imagine you might be thinking, well, I'm prepared for, I should be okay, or this is something I deal with, as far as illness or whatever, but this is not normal. It's okay to not be okay. Would you agree? I don't want to, again, I'm not a healthcare
Mhm.
professional, but I would say definitely if you're listening and you are, just know that this means you too, because you are a human being.
Right. So again, so I don't say that to say, well, this is a normal stress response. Have a nice day.
Exactly.
Right?
Right. Right. No,
You
definitely
want
not.
to, like,
Yeah.
take it to the next step, but I think the first step should just
Isn't it?
is to just, like, understand, like, it's a normal response. In the long run, if it goes untreated and uncared for, it might not be healthy. But in the moment, like, just to create that awareness that it's a normal response, what many of us are feeling.
And Kimberly asked a question. Thank you, Kimberly. She said, how do you feel that affects those who have a flight response when you, I guess you're going to say when you can't flee or when you can flee? She just asked about the people who have the flight response, I guess
Yeah.
the levels of stress.
Right. So I actually think Kimberly's my homie, right? Who's also
Hey,
a social
Kimberly.
worker. Hi.
Can't, when people can't flee. Thank you for that
Right. And people
clarification.
can't flee. And so
Yeah, that's a
we
great question.
actually have, so for many people do know, like, that response, fight, flight, or freeze, right? So like you
Can you
said,
explain that to us so just so
absolutely.
everyone knows?
Absolutely. So when I explained a little while ago about our neurobiological response to stress, let's use your saber-toothed tiger as
Yes.
an example, right?
Right.
Because that's how we're still responding
Mm-hmm.
to stress, right? So let's say, thousands of years ago, you and I are going out, we're foraging, and we're looking for dinner, right? We're hungry, we won't eat. So we're gonna go look for dinner. What happens? We're out minding our business. Here comes the saber-toothed tiger. So instead of us looking for dinner, it's looking like we're gonna be somebody else's dinner.
Right.
So
Which
that
causes acute stress.
acute, okay, with a capital A, all caps. So our initial response to that is the same hormones being released, elevated heart rate in the least, right? Elevated glucose levels, elevated blood pressure. And so we unconsciously, without thinking often, decide unconsciously, am I going to run the heck out of here and run away from this thing so I don't become its dinner? Do I freeze like as a response? Because that also is a part of that whole neurobiological response. Do I freeze? We're like incapacitated. We can't think or strategize how we're going to get out there. Or are we going to fight? Are we going to fight this tiger in the hopes that we beat it down and we take it home for dinner, right? And so these are unconsciously like like the decisions, if you will, that we're making when we experience a stress, right? But that physiological, neurobiological response is still the same. And so, again, in 2020, whether it's the stress of this pandemic, whether it's the stress of how am I going to pay my bills next month, whether it's the stress of my boss, my boss left the organization and now I'm inheriting their work, but I'm not getting a raise, that we're still having that same response than we would have if you and I were facing that saber-toothed tiger.
Mm-hmm.
We
And
have
how
not
does
evolved in that way.
we have not evolved in that way? So if I'm a person who naturally has a flight response, because you said it's not a choice necessarily, it's unconscious in the moment, right? How I respond. So if I have a flight response, does the stress affect me? Might the stress affect me more seriously?
It really depends, right? And because it also depends on what does flight look like, right? So there could be additional risks based on how we how flight shows up for us. Is it just to avoid something? Is it literally to run? But our body, the signal that our body sends and receives is that there's some form of danger. Whether we're running from it, we're freezing as a result of it, or we're fighting it off. Like our body, is preparing, our body and our mind is preparing for some sort of danger because that's how we've perceived it.
Hmm. So, Kimberly, let us know what you think. Is that something like, are you thinking flight as far as retreating from what's going on in the world? Because I have friends or just people I know who have done that too. I talked to Dawn earlier, I might have mentioned it here too, just about how I've learned that working or getting busy was one of my coping mechanisms. Like, I'm just going to keep busy during this time, and then figured out that that wasn't healthy for me. And other people have just sort of shut in and not, wanted to talk about it or talk to anyone else, or we all have different kinds of flight, I guess, in that case of trying not to deal with things in a moment. So let us know what you think of that. If you have some other questions, thank you so much. Kimberly is your homie, just so you know.
Oh,
She says she is
yay!
your
Hi,
homie.
Kim.
She
Kimberly with
said,
two M's.
yes, Kimberly with two M's. She said, actually, mostly right now, I want to run, get on the road and move, and I can't. Oh, I thank you for sharing that. That's real.
So thank you, and thank you, Kim. Like I love her to pieces, and like totally speaking truth there because that actually, so she did a better job of me of even explaining the compounded nature of this, right? So we have that initial reaction to the stress or the trauma, right? But then we also have secondary reactions because we can't run away, right? We can't literally say run away or avoid it or get away from it, right? So that's just another example of like that compounded experience of that stress. It just it just continues to almost like snowball in a way.
And it's interesting. I just was listening to a podcast the other day with Mel Robbins, the speaker and author of the 5 Second Rule. And and it's funny, I'm just picking up, just like with you, I'm picking up so much, of course, from you as I always do. But you pick up different things like, right, that's what I'm feeling, or right, yes, that makes sense now with this whole, again, we're all figuring this out. But one of the things she mentioned was, sometimes we don't realize why we feel, just as you're talking about, stressed or fatigued about simple things like going to the grocery store. And she said, because going to the grocery store isn't simple anymore. Like now you have to sit and think, do I have my mask? Am I going to wear gloves? How many people are going to be there? I wonder if I have to stand in line. Should I get it delivered? Do they have delivery? Even if you're not quote unquote panicking about these things, those are things we never thought
Yep.
about before, right? I literally today had to go get something from my PO box, and I maybe sat for 30 minutes just, I don't want to say dread isn't the word, but it just was like so much had to go into me preparing to go and thinking of the risk of going. So it just, again, just getting back to your original thought, it's normal to feel that this is not, even to know that this is not normal, right? To recognize it and to, as Kimberly said, want to run away. And even that, you're like, well, dang, even if I want to run away, I got to prepare. I got to get my mask, I got to get my gloves. Like, it's just so much to think about. So thank you for that. Anyone, please, again, more questions. Thank you, Kimberly, for sharing. Dawn, one of the second things on your list, the second thing on your list is engage in consistent self-reflection to identify the emotional and mental signs of stress. So what is consistent self-reflection for us?
It's really just like a check-in, you know, it doesn't have to be anything, you know, too formal. You know, it can be. Like me, I'm a journaler. I journal, especially now, I journal a couple times almost every day. I have actually been using up a few journals that I've been holding on for years, right? Um, but it really is just paying attention to yourself and just checking in, you know? And so if we're having like emotional reactions, that really just means like know yourself well enough to know when you are having reactions that are not your norm, if you will, right? So for instance, like I tend to not be a cranky person. The two conditions where I really get cranky, like funky cranky, and my family knows this, is when I am completely physically exhausted, like sleep deprived, because it's very rare that I'm like I can be extremely stressed out, and up until about a year ago, it never impacted my sleep. So if I did not get at least 6.5 hours of sleep, um, I get really cranky. Um, you know, so there's that, you know, when I'm completely exhausted, you know, and sleep deprived, or when I am completely overwhelmed, not just basic overwhelm, but when I am like ready to keel over is when I get cranky. And so either I know that because I'm like, okay, why did I just snap on somebody? Because that's just not how I roll, right? Or somebody who knows me will recognize that. So sometimes my sister will say, like, is everything okay? What you probably have a lot on your plate, like if I've snapped or if I just seem irritable, right? My sister will say that, or my best friend, is everything okay? You know, because this is not you. So it's really just like being authentic and like knowing yourself, like emotionally, like, you know, for are you are we experiencing like moments of sadness? Like there are a few times where I have just been, you know, unfortunately, I know I stopped counting the number of people that I know who have passed away from COVID-19.
Mm.
In one weekend alone, about 3 weeks ago, I think I shared this with you. One weekend alone, there were 3 people that I know who passed away. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And um, you know, even before that, like I know some people and I've just had moments of just uncontrollable sadness, you know, where just a few times I was like doing just like let it rock, you know, just like let it flow because I don't usually experience loss like this, right? So it's just being aware that, again, going back to tip number one, it's like this is a normal reaction, but we have to allow ourselves to have the emotional experience of this, but at the same time, doing that check in and just keeping our finger on the pulse to like really understand, okay, this is like what's coming up for me. Because when we do have a chronic or a longer term experience of stress, right, we do have a higher likelihood of burnout or experiencing burnout. A lot of those emotional reactions can be indicators. So it's one thing to just acknowledge, okay, this is how I'm feeling. But if you're experiencing a lot of those emotional reactions, you know, some of the mental reactions, the loss of concentration, right, the inability to focus. So collectively, that might indicate, okay, I'm really stressed out. Maybe I've experienced this as a trauma, or maybe I'm burning out. So, but we can't get to that point if we don't have the awareness of, okay, this is what's coming up for me, if that makes sense.
That does. I was going to say it's really self-awareness. And I think, everybody who doesn't know, I'm all about support. Support is sexy. So like you said, it's your sister, it's your friend, people to check in on you. And I think, again, for healthcare professionals or for anyone who's the quote unquote strong one in your group or the go-to person, right? You got to make sure that people check on you as well, right? You need to be
Hmm.
supported as well. You can't be the strong one all the time. You have to be able to be, just like you said, self-aware, and then take the next step, which I'm sure we'll talk about, of supporting yourself even once you do realize, okay, this is what's going on, or this is why I'm irritated, and or anything like that. So
Right.
Lamont, hey buddy, Lamont is
Hi,
here.
Lamont.
Lamont asked, how do we develop new healthy ways to deal with the stress? We're going through some of those now, Lamont. But one thing I like that he mentioned, in the current environment, oversleeping, alcohol, etc., are more readily accessible than, say, the gym. Home workouts and running currently, aren't working the way the gym used to. So just coming up with, how do we avoid some of those, maybe the negative things that might be coping, like I talked about, overworking and things like that.
Right. Right. So yeah, so what you just mentioned, it's important. It's important for us to understand that even the unhealthy stuff are ways of coping,
Yes.
right? So we're looking for ways to cope because we are stressed. So it's first important to first just acknowledge that, like for me, like, so when I work with clients in therapy, like one of the first things I say, and I say this to my clients, I'm not telling you that you should go out and get high, to deal with your stress. But I need you, I need for us to really get to a place where you understand that you are looking for ways to cope because there is something that has impacted you, right? And that has harmed you. And that is, that is creating harm. And so, again, because coping is not inherently good, right? So I think, like, in these times we have to have the discipline and the commitment to find new ways, or to adjust the ways that we cope when we can't have access to some of the things that have enabled us to cope, right? So going to the gym, I was like so mad at Rona because I had just started going back into the gym. I was like,
Right. I was so mad to have my
and then I
system
get that
down.
email from my gym, oh, we're closed. I was like, dang, right?
Right.
So my initial thought was, well, dang, I can't go to the gym. Right, I can't go to the gym, but I can still work out, and I can still move, and I can still exercise. I've seen some of your Instagram stories with you jumping rope,
Yeah.
right?
Figuring it out.
And
Yeah.
so when I go do my weekly errands, because I only go out once a week, if I forget something, it waits until the next week. Okay. But I'm parking further away from the store. I will do a couple laps. I also had to go check my P.O. box a few days ago. I did a few laps around the post office, right? Um, we have to, be able to find those ways to adapt. Many of us are doing workouts and yoga, like YouTube yoga, right? I'm loving me some YouTube yoga right
I know, me too. And I've been working
now.
out with Mark Jenkins on Instagram Live, the Mark Jenkins. If anybody wants to join
Yes,
him, you just like gotta find things.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it can be easier for us to go grab the piece of cake because it's laying there on the counter than it is to maybe go do a lap. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and I said to her jokingly, I said, go walk around your house in your yard. She's like, oh, my neighbors are going to think I'm crazy. I said, and so what?
And so
Let
what, and we all
them
going
think
crazy
you're
right
crazy.
now.
You're going to get your heart rate up. Like,
Exactly.
so this is an opportunity for us to kind of let go of some of the beliefs and attachments we have to what does it mean to work out and where am I supposed to go? Like, I'm cute because I can go check in on Facebook at the gym. Well, you know what I'm saying? Like, there are other ways that we can do that. Like, I one day was doing laundry and I got upstairs. I realized I had forgot my laundry basket downstairs, and I was like, dang. Went back to get it, and I was like, you know what? Let me run up and down these stairs real quick. you know?
Right, right. Exactly. Everything becomes
Yeah,
something you can use. That's right.
absolutely.
Yes, no, that's good. And I think something struck me that you said, and I've been using this word so casually, just I can't remember the phrase you used, but you were saying that basically coping is in itself is problematic. The idea,
Well, no,
or coping is
coping,
unhealthy.
coping is not inherently always healthy,
Right, that's what you said. It's
right?
not always
So
okay.
grabbing the piece of cake is coping. It's just not. I mean, what's wrong with one piece of cake? But you know what I mean? If we're reaching
Yeah.
for it,
So it's how you're
help us
coping.
medicate the effects of stress or sadness or feelings of loneliness because we're isolated, right? I miss people. I miss hugging people. I miss being around people. Like, so like, but for some people who are deeply impacted by the isolation, right? Grabbing for that piece of cake or eating the whole cake, right? Or eating all the snacks and Reese's Pieces. I mean, I'm telling on myself because I love Reese's Pieces, but but like really,
Right.
but grabbing for it as a means of coping as opposed to having a piece of cake because you want to have a piece of cake. They're two very different things. So it's just important to understand that we cope, but it's not always inherently healthy.
Number 3 on your list, you say prioritize your basic needs. Why is that important for healthcare professionals to manage stress and burnout?
Yeah, because again, like we're putting everybody else first, right? And so that particular article was written specifically for a lot of physicians who are literally like in the ERs and who are treating people. And, many of them are working longer shifts. And so they are not, you know, they're not prioritizing eating, right? I have a friend who's, well, she's a urologist, but she was helping to fill in the ER, and we were texting one day and she's like, I haven't eaten in hours. And I was like, well, how many hours? She was like, probably 8.
Mm, you're like, what?
And I was like, what? I sent like an emoji, like, what? And she, and I get it, but I'm still like 8 hours. And she's like, that's the norm these days, So it's like first, you have to eat, like even if it's just like smaller meals throughout the day or something, so it's like you have to get your fuel, you have to get your nutrients, you have to, because if you're not eating, especially if you go 8 hours without eating, that tends to make us tired, which is not going to help you if you're working longer shifts in the ER during a pandemic, right? So we have to prioritize like our basic care. Even me, I mean, just days where I can be sitting at my computer for hours and I'm like, oh shoot, I haven't eaten, right? So we need that. We need the basic high, food, water, sleep. Sleep deprivation like is such a killer. We're only really within the last few years really starting to talk about the impact of sleep deprivation and sleep disturbances, right? So we have to, we have to make a commitment. However, that's going to work within someone's schedule. We have to make the commitment to, eat, sleep, water, bathe, the
And go to the bathroom. Like
yes,
this is something
yes,
I just had this conversation with Nadia Lopez, who's the founder of Mott Hall
bridges,
in
Academy,
Bridges
yeah,
in
I'm a
Brooklyn.
fan of her.
Exactly. And she talks about how she ended up getting sick and affecting her kidneys. She's been open about this and talked about it recently on my podcast, affecting her kidneys because she would sit in her office for hours at a time
Without
and
going
not
to the bathroom.
without
Yep,
going to the bathroom, without even realizing that she didn't go to the bathroom. Now she's an educator, but if you imagine if you're in the ER or
mhm,
doing all these other things or taking care of people or, helping people and you just get caught up and we've all, like, oh my gosh, I didn't go to the bathroom. But when you
right,
just continue and continue, just as we talked about the stress, it affects your body. So the
that's right.
basic needs to take care of yourself.
Hmm.
Yes. So Kimberly said, what are your recommendations when we do fall off our routines because we are so burnt out? Are there recommendations you have for getting back on track, basically, so we're not falling back on those unhealthy things, unhealthy coping?
Yeah, I know what always works for me because I fall off just like anybody else, right? But for me, again, like having that consistent commitment to just like self-reflection, because I know for me, when I can acknowledge to myself that I was falling off, and I'm not gonna lie, sometimes like there's a little bit of guilt, so I'm like, okay, Dawn, get it together, like get it together. I also have, which because you and I have known each other for a while, support is sexy was a rallying cry for me too, because I was not always one to ask for support or reach out for real accountability, like for real, because I know how I can get over, like, you know,
We all know.
in my business, but
Hmm.
there are people in my life, like we really hold each other accountable. I just got one of those text messages before I signed on to this show, right? One of my best friends of 27 years sent me a text message. We pretty much text several times a week, every other day, and part of that is always just updating each other on what we're doing for ourselves. And she texted me, she said, you know what, we haven't texted since Monday and just checking in to see how you're taking care of yourself. I always want to be able to give her like a positive report, not to please her, but because it's a part of holding myself accountable, right? So I think the first thing is not to beat yourself up, because I would be black and blue all the time if I beat myself up.
Right. I know that's right.
So like I'd be hurt all the time, So it's really just like having that authentic like commitment, like, okay, like I've fallen off track, but here's how I can get back on track, like, and do something, something that is going to feed your soul. And I think we will get to one of the other tips where we talk like more specifically about like how we can, literally have like a direct impact on the stress. So, it's really just about acknowledging without judgment, without self-judgment, and then just getting back on track.
Right. I recently, you and I talked about this, wrote just an email about being gentle. Like that's one of the
Mhm.
things I'm learning, to be gentle with myself and not, maybe before pre-pandemic, I would get 12 things on my to-do list done that day and, just knocking things out. But of course, all the stress and everything of
Right.
the realities of the pandemic weren't there. So now if I do one good thing a day, I'm like, ooh,
Okay.
celebrating. All right. Yes.
Give
Or if I
yourself
do
a pat on
nothing,
the back.
if
Right.
I choose to do nothing that day, like, you know what, today I don't have any meetings or anything urgent. I'm just gonna relax and be. And
That's right.
so
That's
yeah, it's
right.
just being
You know
gentle
what's
with yourself.
what's interesting about what you just said about doing nothing, and I totally embrace that. It's taken me years to embrace that, but I heard something on a podcast, don't remember which one, but the speaker was saying technically we're never doing nothing. So at first I'm like, okay, this is like some self-help BS.
Right, right. You see me like,
Because I've embraced doing nothing as self-care, right?
mm-hmm.
She's like, if you're laying down and you're watching Netflix, you're laying down and watching Netflix. If you are just staring out into the universe and looking at the stars, you're looking at the stars. We base whether we're doing something or nothing based on the degree to which we're working.
Oh,
Whether
that's
it's, I
good.
was like, this was my sermon, right?
Right.
Whether we're working as far as our job that pays us, whether we're working by taking care of others, children, family, personal business, we have to, she's like, I just encourage people to really like step away from this notion of doing nothing because that in itself, we tend to feel guilty about doing nothing.
Yeah, that
Because
now that
we're
you
so
mentioned it, that
close.
language is even, yeah, the idea of nothing is sort of like, this is just yeah, that's very interesting.
Hmm.
I love these conversations. That's
Right?
very interesting. I'm like, yeah, it's got to be very conscious of that. It even programs you to think that this is nothing or passive, as opposed to it's something you're choosing to do to relax, to take care of yourself, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, to unwind, whatever. Yes, absolutely. So you also said take brief mental breaks throughout the day. What could that look like for us?
Yeah, so, our brains racing, right? So what the science tells us is like when our brains are like consistently racing, it has a mental and physiological like, impact as far as like fatigue, right? And so a lot of times what it results in is like a brain fog. It results in an inability to focus because it's just like our like system is just like overloaded. And so, like, some little quick things that we can do, like in the moment, and you don't have to invest even that much time, is to just, and you don't even have to be like in a Zen, meditation state, perfectly in silence, but just to consciously just like take a break from whatever thoughts, right? So you're thinking about the work, you're thinking about, oh my goodness, all these patients that are so sick, some who've passed away that I've treated just in this one shift, but just to take like a mental break, to from that thought process, even if it means thinking about a cupcake with sprinkles, like
Hmm.
even if it's just something that can distract you, but can take you out of that thought process, because those types of thought processes can then kick up the stress response that we started talking about, right? So taking that mental break is like so important. And again, it doesn't need to be 15 minutes, 15 hours. It literally can just be just like a few moments to just shift our focus to something that doesn't have to be so overwhelming or a thought process that's not so regimented.
Yeah, so it sounds like I'm thinking about Kimberly's question earlier, like even if it's just stepping, like you talked about wanting to run, Kimberly, understandably, but even stepping away somewhere where you can find a quiet space. You mentioned that in your article, Dawn, and just,
Hmm.
breathing for a little bit, or just even for me, sometimes even it's like just being quiet for a couple minutes can shift things for you.
Hmm.
Yes. All right. So our next one is no, excuse me, incorporate sensory soothing techniques to facilitate calm and relaxation. Tell
Yeah,
us more
this is
about
my
that.
favorite. This is my favorite. So, um, there's so much power that comes through what we perceive through the senses, the five senses, right? And so, what many people don't realize is just being mindful and being present and being connecting with what we're perceiving through the five senses in any given moment actually can have like a neurobiological, like calming effect. So, what does that mean? It just means being present and connecting to what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you feel, or what's touching you, what you taste, like in any given moment, right? So, like in this moment, I'm focusing on you on my computer screen. I see you wearing what looks like maybe a pink shirt.
Yes, yes.
Pink shirt. It says "Hey" on it. So I'm not just
Oh, so
"Hey sis," yes. No,
yes.
I'm not just reading what's on your shirt or looking at the color. I'm actually really connecting with it, right? It looks like a blush pink,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I can hear if hopefully you all can't. I can still hear my neighbor cutting
Your
his
neighbor weed whacking.
right. So he is, and it's dark out now. So he definitely is committed to neat hedges. So I can hear the buzz of the hedge cutters. I also very faintly hear one of my dogs barking in the background to just be like in the moment, right? So I still smell a freshly sharpened pencil. I had sharpened some pencils because I love old school pencils. I like mechanical pencils, but I love
What?
old school
I'm
pencils.
trying to remember that smell. That's such a
It's like a
distinct
woodsy,
smell.
it like
Yes.
with the light scent of like the lead and the eraser. So
Yes.
I sharpened a few pencils before I hopped on this with you. So I can still like smell a faint scent of the sharpened pencil and the eraser, right? So I can feel myself in this chair. It's not the most comfortable of my chairs, but I feel myself in this chair. I feel that I'm not fully sitting back to the chair, but I feel it is touching my lower back, right? And so just being conscious, but understanding that those sensory, they call them sensory soothing activities, actually can have an impact on stress. In many cases, like when we treat folks with trauma, there are many different ways of treating trauma that involve sensory perception, right? So there are times, again, I'm a Pisces, so I can daydream, right? I love, like, when I gaze out this window that's behind my computer, in the earlier part of the night, I can see the moon rising. I could sit here forever. Like the moon will be on the other side of the earth at that point, but I'm still like looking out the window. I love looking at art, especially like jewel tone color palettes. Like I love that. That just it heals me, to be quite honest. I have um what do you call it? Spotify playlists that's just running water. I have a
Wow.
Spotify playlist of rain sounds. It goes from everything to from a thunderstorm to light rain. You want to calm Dawn Shedrick down? Send me a playlist with water. Again, I'm a Pisces. I have a
Interesting. So
playlist
you
that
do you play that? I'm just curious about that one. Do you play that at night or whenever you just want to listen to something
anytime of
calming?
day,
That's a
anytime
great
of
tip.
day. I turn on my Bluetooth speaker, especially in here, like when I'm working. Turn on my Bluetooth speaker. I have a playlist that's rain sounds. I have a playlist that's streams. So I break down my water
I
sounds.
know because
I
you are such a
am,
Pisces. You are a
right? I
Pisces
am.
all the way. I
But
love it.
whatever, like, so even what sounds, music,
It's so
you know,
smart.
just it's healing. People don't, yeah, I think people embrace it as healing, but understand it's physiological, psychological healing just by just connecting with what you're receiving through the senses. It's healing.
Yeah, I can see why that's your favorite one. I think that's one of my favorite ones too of the tips that you
Get you
shared.
some
It's
water sounds in your life, I'm telling you.
I know. I mean, the water, I'm doing that
I'll send you some.
immediately.
You have
Yes.
Spotify? I'll send you some.
Yes.
I'll send you some of my
Please. No, that's awesome. And I think it's just such a great reminder of just, it's about presence, right? About being present in the moment. And just as you said, the listening to things. And I do that in the morning. I'm out here at my parents' house. I say in the woods, it's in Stone Mountain, Georgia. It's not really the woods, but I say the woods, right? But every morning, 6 a.m., I don't know what kind of birds they are, but they are on time every morning. But I
Okay.
just listen. That's the only thing you hear, before like the world really, especially now, because most people aren't getting out and traveling and commuting, but just being aware of that. And for me, saying thank you, like being grateful for that kind of helps me start from a place of just peace every morning. I think it's funny, the first few days when we were all starting to really learn the seriousness of the virus and things were shutting down, having those birds still chirp every morning at 6 o'clock calmed me, because it was
Okay.
like they still like, listen, I'm still a bird. This is still what I do until the world disappears. This is what the sun still rises. I still chirp at 6 a.m. So being aware of that too.
Yeah.
Yes, excellent. I love that. That's great, Dawn. Kimberly said, break down them water sounds. I
Yeah.
know that's right. I
Okay.
know.
I'll
She's
send
like,
you
I got
those
the
too,
stream, I
Kimberly.
got the still water, the pond. I know. Send
I
us Kim.
listen. I like even listening to the storms. I have one that's rainstorms.
I love that.
Yeah, I break it down, but that's just me being extra. But
No, but it's not. But you think
I'm
about,
conscious that that's healing for me. It's very much.
yeah. Well, you think about when you go to a spa, a lot of them just have the running water, the fountains,
Mhm.
because of the
I have
sound
one
of
of
the.
those in my office too.
You know what? Let's go to the next. Tip number 6, create and nurture supportive connections with your colleagues. Talk about that for us.
Yeah. So again, support is sexy, right?
Yes.
And um, and so when I was writing the article, I found some data that talked about, like, even though a lot of folks that are working in the ERs during COVID-19, there's a lot of folks that are on the ground, on the front lines, that they're still operating in silos. They're not reaching out for support. They're just going through all of these shifts, dealing with, the risk of contracting the illness, seeing how it's impacting people, and just not really reaching out. And so, yeah, that's really just like a nudge for us, whether we're physically on the front lines or just are being impacted by this in some way, to like reach out, whether it's offering support or receive it, which is so much more, can be challenging for many of us, is to receive it, right? Many of us are giving it out. That's the virtue of the work that we're doing, but to actually receive it.
Yes, and hopefully this conversation will help you all know, for any healthcare professionals who watch this now or later, to know that reaching out for support. I mean, as Dawn said, that my whole thing is around support is sexy. But
Right.
again, when you're in a position or profession, even not even a position, a profession where you're all about caring for other people, you have to remember to get support for yourself. So Dawn, what are some examples or tools? And again, anyone, please ask questions. What are some examples or tools that you have either recommended or used to help people make those connections? Maybe they don't feel like, for whatever reason, they can talk to their colleagues, or they might be some fear about that, or who knows? What are some other maybe resources and things that people can tap into?
Yeah, so I say, like, if people don't feel comfortable or feel self-conscious, because a lot of people still, for many years, that was my struggle, right? I'm supposed to be the strong one, so how am I gonna,
Hmm.
I'm for the most part, I'm about 92% over that, right?
Right.
Because I myself once was hospitalized with exhaustion.
Mm.
Like, for real, was like totally overwhelmed, and my doctor was like, you're dehydrated and exhausted. And I said, this was about 6 years ago, and I said to my doctor, my primary care physician, I've been with him for 35 years. I'm 46, and I've been with him since I was, yeah, like 11. So he
Wow.
knows me
He
very,
knows you. Yes.
and he's allowed to cuss me out. So
Hmm.
basically, he was like, he hospitalized me overnight. I was dehydrated, which is very rare for me, because I naturally, again, Pisces, but I naturally drink at least a gallon of water every day, no matter what, right? And so I always thought exhaustion and extreme stress was this PR, thing that
Right.
celebrities
Celebrities.
put out
Exactly.
there when they were going to drug rehab, right? I never knew until then that it was a real thing. And so that really was like the kick in the butt for me, like, get it together, reach out for help. Like, for me, it was almost like one of my life goals was to not reach out for help. And so if you're not comfortable in this moment reaching out to the people who are in your life, there actually are some really great Facebook groups, like groups online, whether it's a dedicated website where there are discussion boards and people reach out or whatever. I've seen that work, or if you have access to an employee assistance program, a lot of those programs are confidential, right? Reach out somewhere, somehow. So if you don't, if you don't feel comfortable like leaning in on your friends and your loved ones, maybe some people might be more comfortable like reaching out, in the internet, universe. There are some, relatively private spaces and boards and forums, to do that. So
Especially looking for people who are in the same profession, right? Like at least even if
absolutely.
you don't feel comfortable interacting right away, sometimes just seeing that other people might be experiencing similar problems, issues, or trying to
Mhm.
figure out how to deal, especially now, could be
Yeah.
of support.
Yeah, like on Facebook, I'm in several Facebook groups. Well, not several, but a handful of Facebook groups for folks that are in higher education. But in a few of those groups, we've been sharing like how have we been coping with, you know, with this crisis in the classroom? How are we just had such a rich discussion in one of those groups this week. It's still going on this week, talking about many of us have had students who have either contracted COVID-19. A few of the folks in this particular discussion unfortunately had students who passed away from
Yeah,
COVID-19. And so I just, and I keep looking for the notifications in those groups because we've just been so supportive of one another, just validating each other, just giving each other virtual hugs, but it's a lively, rich discussion. And for some people, like that can be supportive.
absolutely. Sometimes that can be life saving too, because if you're
Absolutely.
feeling, especially now where if you live alone, physically isolated and alone, and then if you feel alone because you're managing all this stress and being the strong one, or again, you're in this
Hmm.
profession where you're there to help everyone. So that outreach is so important. And thank God for online because that
Right.
allows us to get out of our own, own way. So our last one is seek professional support to cope with moral distress and grief.
Yeah. So moral distress, specifically within healthcare and the helping professions, it really is just that. It's that feeling of not being able to help everyone. That feeling of I've done my best, but this patient still passed away.
Mm,
That feeling of um, guilt, if you will, because a physician had to make a decision to put one particular patient on a ventilator because they only had a certain number available at the time, and some other patients unfortunately passed away before they could get treatment, right? Or the social worker who hasn't been able to get in touch, whether on phone or video, with some of their patients or clients that they know are in distress and are probably being triggered. Maybe even there's a high risk of relapse of an addiction, right? That feeling of, I cannot do enough, I have not been enough. Right. So that's the heart of moral distress. And it's a thing, right? It's not a diagnosable condition, but it's a real experience for many of us who do this work. And so it can be really challenging to navigate moral distress. There's even personal dimensions of moral distress, right? Being, having, say, elderly family members who you cannot physically go help because of social distancing, and you don't want to, increase their risk of possibly contracting COVID-19, right? And so the nasty thing about moral distress is it's like this cyclical experience that builds upon the guilt, that builds upon the sadness, and it becomes really challenging. It can be challenging to break out of that on our own if we don't have a lot of our own personal practices to help us address that, right? So that's where speaking to a professional, reaching out to an employee assistance program, heck, they have, not only do they have teletherapy, you can talk to a counselor via text these days.
right.
There's like,
Yes, you and I talked about that. I shared with you, right, about teletherapy. I was like, oh, wow, you can get this online and talk to
right,
somebody. And
or you can
absolutely.
get it via text message. Now,
Mhm.
more, more chronic forms of, say, depression,
Right.
that might not work, with texting, but I said this recently. I had a conversation with somebody who was like, oh, I don't believe in that. How am I going to text a therapist? I said to this person, well, you text this therapist
I know that's right.
and I give you lots of,
Right.
and I love you, but I give you lots of free therapy. So how would that
Hmm.
be different for anybody else who would pay for that, pay for the time, right? Again, it doesn't, it has its applicability. If somebody is, say, having suicidal ideation or is like significantly, it's traumatized, then it might not work. You can't do complicated psychotherapeutic treatment interventions necessarily via text, but it's viable when you just need some support,
Right.
you know?
Amen. And
Again,
you
we
think about
chat with
even
each other
too,
for free a lot. So,
right.
you know,
Right. And then too, you might feel, I mean, depending on what you, again, like we said, whatever circumstance you're in, how comfortable you feel in your position or the people with whom you work, it might be better to talk to that third party person via text or phone or, video, because you don't feel as judged. Even if it's all in your own head right now, it doesn't matter. We just want
right,
to make sure everything is out of the way for you to get the help.
right.
So Richard said, I was hoping there would be an opportunity for everyone in the group to share with one another. Oh, as social workers, we could all benefit hearing from one another about our experiences and how we are managing. While I appreciate you, what you all have to offer, I was actually expecting more of a group discussion and contact with other participants. Thank you for the presentation. Richard, thank you so much for your feedback. I'm sorry you thought we all were gonna, everyone's gonna come on camera. We can, if you would like to come on and talk, you're welcome to do that. And I created this space so that people can listen and ask their questions. And then if people want to come on camera, because sometimes folks are making
Hmm.
dinner or driving and listening or doing some other things. So, and but I think to your point, just to support you, to your point, finding places where, Dawn, if you have any suggestions, finding places where you can have a discussion where everyone can come together, or creating that space, that's an opportunity too, to create a space where you say, and I know people who have done this in other professions, or even with, I know I've done it even with my friends, let's all get together and chat and talk and just check in and see how you're doing. And I would imagine, just as you said, Richard, that being able to do that and hear from each other and share experiences would be important. So if there's something that you do want to share, let me know, let us know. We're winding down the wind down. So now would be the time to do that. And I'll figure out how to bring you on. I got to figure that out.
And I'll also say, like, I have, over the past month or so, I've hosted a couple of, again, like, let's just get on Zoom, conversations. So, Richard, thank you for putting that out there. I don't know if you and I, Richard, are connected. You can look me up on LinkedIn, and I'll make sure that, like, you can get on my email list, because there's no reason why I can't, also, like, host some additional conversations. I know there are other social work and healthcare organizations out there that have done that as well.
Yeah, so actually that's a good segue to that. I think, let's say, well, Kimberly said, yes, how do I let my peeps know that I am a social worker and not their social worker? So we'll
Okay.
we'll answer that question. And then Vaughn, hey Vaughn said, this is great info,
Hi,
Dawn.
welcome.
Thank you, Elayne.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Vaughn. But Dawn, since you mentioned that, I do think, and again, Richard, thank you for your comment. Please share with people how they can get on your email list, how they can follow you, because everyone, this is what Dawn does. This is not, I just wanted to bring her to share this not to pressure you, have people texting you, but just to
No, it's all
share.
good.
No, honestly, to share this information. As I mentioned, I am not a healthcare professional or social worker. I just wanted to have this conversation and bring someone who is, because I know this is a community that is, coping with this in unique ways, as a human being, as we all are, but then in these unique ways. So, Dawn, tell everyone how to get in touch with you, where to follow you, your website, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, the best place to find me, at least to start with, is on LinkedIn. Dawn Shedrick, Shedrick. There are a few of you that, just from hearing some of the names, I know there are some of my peeps that have my number. That's all good. Um, but you can find me on LinkedIn. I do answer my messages on LinkedIn. So if you shoot me a message, then I can make sure that you get whatever other way, we can stay connected. Yeah, so that's the best place to start. And yeah, I'll keep everybody posted, even just, again, I have no problem putting together. I mean, I'm on Zoom all the time, like all the rest of the world, right? So
Right, right.
I don't mind hosting another Zoom
Zoom is basically the phone now.
there. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
no,
So,
that's great. And so get in touch with Dawn to tell her, share, what kind of things you're looking for, what your needs are. And like she said, she could potentially put together something that's a forum for more folks to talk and communicate. Or even if it's not you, because we don't want you to take on another thing, Dawn. Even if it's not you doing it, I'm sure there might even be some suggestions, as you said, for other groups and things.
there are a few
Um,
others that are doing it that I know of. So
yeah,
yeah, like I can
exactly.
certainly share the resources.
Yeah, perfect. And did you say your website? I know you said your LinkedIn.
Oh, so my company website is JenTex Training, JEN as in Nancy, TEX training.com. There's information there about like trainings and workshops we have coming up, but that's also another way to reach me. If you shoot an email through the website, that's another way to reach me.
Perfect. Dawn, thank you so much.
Thank
I appreciate
you.
you. I hope you all got some great information from this conversation. Again, if you have any final questions, please let us know. Dawn, I do want to ask you before one, I want to take, I'm raising my glass to you. Cheers with my broken nail there. Cheers.
Cheers.
But I do want to thank you, want to acknowledge you for the work that you do to support healthcare professionals. Absolutely. And acknowledge all of you, Kimberly, Vaughn, Richard, all of you, everyone in here. Thank you so much for joining us, for being a part of this conversation, for sharing, for the work that you all do. Is just so it's just beyond important, and we're all realizing it. If we hadn't before, realizing it now. So, Dawn, before you go, what would you say as a parting piece of advice from you to everyone here about anything?
Thank you. I would just say be good to yourself. Like be as you said, like be gentle with yourself. You'll know when those moments arise that that is really going to be necessary to just be gentle with yourself and to give yourself permission to be gentle with yourself. Whatever that looks and feels like for you is to just make no apology about taking care of yourself, even if it means that other people will get pissed off, because that's been my experience over the past few years, right? Saying no to happy hour invitations and stuff like that because that's the only night that I can have to myself, right? So just give yourself the love and the care that we so freely give the rest of the world. Because not only is it warm and fuzzy and feel good, but it's healing and it's TLC and it's going to address the stress and reduce the stress and it's going to hopefully extend our expiration date on this planet even beyond the Rona.
Beyond the Rona. I know that's right. And actually, because you mentioned saying no, the last couple of minutes, I know we're a few minutes over, but because Kimberly did mention about letting peeps know that you're a social worker, but you're not their social worker. And I, again, speaking to healthcare professionals, people know, isn't this your job? This is what you do. You should help me. Talk to us just a little bit about how you've embraced no over the past year or so, or
Okay.
how you're learning to embrace it and how that has even helped you.
All right. You only giving me a minute to say this because
I know exactly.
that's been my life and it's really been the biggest part of my healing and growth over the past say 5 years or so because I was the poster child for yes girls, especially when it came with being everybody's social worker. That's a big part of who I am. Like I love people, I take care of people, right? But for so long I felt that that defined me, and I felt that I was conditioned from many different ways that you give, and maybe in your next life you'll reap the rewards of it, right? But you have to be willing and committed to caring for yourself so much, and especially establishing those boundaries, that if people are going to feel some kind of way about it, that's going to tell you, it's going to give you a lot of intel, right? I have had some very, very close people who I love and who I still love, who have really taken it personal when I don't answer the text within an hour, or like literally, like people like shockingly, or people who, when I say, honey, I think maybe you might need to talk to somebody professionally. Well, literally, I've had people, and I quote, well, that's why I'm reaching out to you.
Mm,
So like but I also taught them to treat me that way for many years. So,
mm.
but we have to, like, establishing those boundaries is self-love. Like it's self-love. And when I tell you that it has healed me By doing that, it doesn't mean I love people any less. It just means that I have to have that boundary. And so maybe I can't be your therapist, but I can still love you and support you in other ways, right? Maybe I can't help you plan that surprise party for, our BFF, but I can give you some recommendations and referrals, and maybe I can even give you money to put towards the party, right? So it's, if we really want to part now, another gem that I got from one of my pastors many years ago is sometimes saying no to other people is saying yes to yourself.
Amen.
And I'm a yes now. I haven't always been a yes to myself. And sometimes I slip up, but for the most part, I'm a yes to myself. And I'm okay with that. If I'm authentically like taking care of myself and not being selfish, right? Then I can embrace that.
Beautiful. That's perfect. Dawn, thank you so much. Thank you
Right.
all so much. I'm going to call you after this so we can chat about it. But
Absolutely.
thank you. I appreciate you. I love you.
Thank
And
you. I
I
love you
will.
too. Good night, everyone. Have
Good
a
night.
wonderful day.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.